Ancient Egypt looks incredible from a museum. The gold, the carvings, the perfectly preserved everything. Now imagine actually living there. No air conditioning, no germ theory, no currency. Just you, a dirt floor, a health bar already in the yellow, and a government that needs 40-story monuments built in 40-degree heat, payable in literal bread. The New Kingdom is considered the height of Egyptian civilization, which means this is as good as it ever got. Roughly 90% of the population were peasant farmers. Infant mortality sat somewhere between 20 and 50%. Congratulations on making it this far. It gets considerably worse from here. The first thing you need to understand about ancient Egypt is that the land itself was not designed with your survival in mind. The Nile gave life. Yes, everyone knows that part. Rich black silt, predictable flooding cycles, the agricultural miracle that fed one of the ancient world's great civilizations. What the museum plaques leave out is that the same river also delivered parasites, contaminated the drinking water, bred mosquitoes at industrial scale, and flooded your house with enough regularity that "my floor's wet again" was essentially a personality trait for most Egyptian farmers. You've landed in the breadbasket of the ancient world, and it is actively trying to digest you. Geography first, because geography is your character sheet and you didn't get to pick your stats. Egypt is basically a very thin strip of survivable land, the Nile Valley and its delta, bookended on both sides by desert that will kill you in hours if you wander into it without knowing what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. The Black Land, which is what Egyptians called the Fertile Nile Strip, makes up maybe 5% of Egypt's total territory. The other 95% is the Red Land, dry, hostile, empty, and not interested in keeping you alive. Your entire world functionally is a narrow green corridor. Don't get any ideas about leaving. Now, let's talk about where you fit in this corridor, because ancient Egyptian society had a very specific place for everyone, and the place it has for you is not going to thrill you. At the top sits the pharaoh, divine king, son of Ra. Whatever he says is law. Subscribe. Just below him are the viziers, high priests, and noble administrators, which is the ancient equivalent of middle management, except they have actual power and access to the good food. Below them sit the scribes and skilled craftsmen, educated and relatively comfortable. Then you have the military, the merchants, and the minor officials. And then, making up somewhere around 90% of the entire population, you have the farmers. Congratulations. You're a farmer. This isn't a demotion. This was always going to be your starting class. As a foreigner with no language skills, no documented lineage, no knowledge of hieroglyphics, and a complexion that makes you stick out in a crowd like a particularly confused tourist, you were never going to land in the scribal class. The social hierarchy here is ancient, rigid, and largely hereditary, which means the family you were born into determined your job, your diet, your housing, and your general proximity to death. Since the space-time continuum orphaned you on arrival, you've been assigned to the nearest farming village by default. The overseer there, a man we'll call Amenhotep, who is tired of your nonsense, has already given you a look that communicates everything you need to know about your new employment situation. Your new home is a small mud brick house on the edge of the Nile floodplain, which sounds quaint right up until you notice the floor is packed dirt, the roof is thatch, and the walls have gaps that the insects treat as a public thoroughfare. Furniture is minimal: a sleeping mat, a clay pot, a grinding stone for the grain. The grain is your entire economic existence. You grow it, you grind it, you bake it into the dense, gritty flatbread that is going to be the centerpiece of approximately every meal you eat from now until you die, which the actuarial tables suggest will be sooner than you'd like. Average life expectancy hovers somewhere in the mid-30s, and that number is being dragged up by the people who made it past childhood, which, as previously noted, was its own obstacle course. Food is whatever the land and the Nile can be convinced to produce. Emmer wheat and barley are your staples. Bread is the currency, the meal, and the metric by which your labor gets compensated. You'll eat it with onions, with garlic, with whatever vegetables your plot can push out of the ground. If the fishing level of whoever raised you was high enough, you might see dried fish a few times a week. Catfish, tilapia, pulled from the Nile and sun-dried until they achieve a texture best described as enthusiastic jerky. There's also beer, which sounds like a perk until you understand that Egyptian beer is thick, cloudy, partially fermented grain slurry that you drink through a reed straw to filter out the solid chunks. It is nutritious. It is not refreshing. You drink it anyway because the water situation is exactly what you'd expect from a river that everything and everyone uses for everything. The farming calendar runs your life now, and it runs on the Nile's schedule, not yours. Flood season hits between June and September. The river rises, the fields disappear underwater, and you temporarily lose your job. This sounds like a vacation. It is not a vacation. Flood season is when the Pharaoh's labor conscription kicks in, which means the moment your fields go underwater, Amenhotep, who is tired of your nonsense, informs you that you've been volunteered for construction duty. The monuments don't build themselves. You look up at the horizon, where the top of a half-finished structure shimmers in the heat, and something in your gamer brain registers this as a new quest. Your gamer brain is wrong about how fun this is going to be. Planting season follows the flood, running through the cooler months when the silt-enriched soil is actually workable. This is when you and every other farmer in the village are out in the fields with wooden hoes and bronze sickles, planting emmer wheat in rows while the sun climbs the sky and does its best to empty you of all moisture. The work is repetitive, physical, and unforgiving. Bend, plant, move, repeat. From sunrise until the light makes it impossible. You share the fields with your neighbors, a rotating cast of dusty, competent people who have been doing this their entire lives and have very little patience for someone who keeps stopping to appreciate the historic significance of the scenery. You cut the grain at harvest with a sickle. You try not to cut anything else. You mostly succeed. The ground is warm underfoot. The air smells like dust and river mud. And somewhere in the middle distance, a dog is barking at something that turns out to be nothing. This is your life now. It is not glamorous. It is not what you imagined when someone said ancient Egypt. The pyramids are real. You can see one on a clear day, rising out of the desert like the world's most ambitious filing cabinet. You will never go inside it. You will possibly help build a slightly smaller version of it during flood season while eating sandy bread and trying not to think too hard about the structural integrity of the ramp you're standing on. Amenhotep, who is tired of your nonsense, watches from the shade. He's brought water for himself. He has not brought water for you. The harvest comes in, the grain gets measured, a portion goes to the temple, a portion goes to the state, and what's left goes to you, which is enough to survive on if nothing goes wrong. Things are about to go wrong. Flood season ends the way a bad game patch drops, abruptly, without warning, and with immediate consequences you weren't prepared for. One morning the water level drops 2 inches. And Amenhotep, who is tired of your nonsense, appears at your mud brick doorway before sunrise with a look that says your construction secondment is over and the fields are back, which means you are back in the fields immediately with no recovery period because the silt window doesn't wait for anyone's sleep schedule. The Nile has deposited its annual layer of rich black sediment across every surface, which sounds like a gift until you're ankle deep in it at dawn, driving a wooden hoe into ground that is simultaneously the most fertile soil in the ancient world and the heaviest thing you've ever tried to move. Your lower back registers a formal complaint. No one receives it. Planting in the post-flood season is a full village operation, which means you spend your days working in close proximity to every other farmer in the settlement, coughing neighbors, children underfoot, animals wandering through the rows with complete indifference to your agricultural project. The village has maybe 40 or 50 households. You know all of them by sight now. You know which ones have persistent coughs. There are several. You file this information away in a part of your brain labeled things to worry about later and keep moving because the grain doesn't plant itself and Amenhotep is watching. By the third week of planting season, you've developed a rhythm. Bend, push, move. Bend, push, move. Your hands have gone from soft to cracked to something resembling leather, which the style guide of ancient Egyptian survival would list under character progression. Unpleasant. You've started recognizing the birds that follow the plow, ibises mostly, picking insects out of the disturbed soil with a focus and efficiency you find genuinely inspiring, given that you yourself can barely focus on anything except the growing awareness that your sandals are disintegrating. Egyptian sandals are made from woven papyrus reeds. They are not built for the kind of daily abuse you're subjecting them to. A man in the next row over, who we'll call Ka, notices you staring at your own feet and says something in rapid Egyptian that you don't understand but which has the cadence of rookie mistake. Ka has been doing this since he was 6. Ka finds you mildly entertaining. The food situation, which was already not good, reveals new depths of not goodness as the season wears on. Bread remains the cornerstone of every meal. Dense emmer flatbread, baked on a clay surface, gritty in a way that you've stopped noticing with your teeth, but will definitely notice with your teeth in about 10 years when several of them crack. The grain has sand in it. This is not an accident or a quality control failure. Sand gets into the grain during processing, into the millstone during grinding, into the dough during everything. Egyptian dental remains from this period show wear patterns that archaeologists describe clinically as severe, and that you would describe as oh no. You eat it anyway, there is nothing else. Some days Ka brings fish, dried tilapia from the Nile, flat and stiff as a piece of bark, torn into strips and eaten with garlic. These are the good days. You rank them accordingly. On the bad days, it's onions on bread with warm water, which is a meal in the same way that a participation trophy is an achievement. The beer helps, technically. The beer is always there. You've stopped trying to drink it like a beverage and started treating it like a meal with a straw, which is actually the correct approach, and something you wish someone had told you earlier. Ka watches you figure this out and says something that is definitely finally in Egyptian. Construction season was its own punishment, and the memory of it sits in your shoulder joints like an unwelcome house guest. For 8 weeks during the flood, you helped transport limestone blocks from a processing ramp to a storage platform roughly 200 meters away. A distance that sounds manageable until you've done it 40 times in a single day in direct sun with a carrying yoke that was designed for a man 4 inches shorter than you. The blocks weighed somewhere between 50 and 100 kilograms. You know this because you lifted them and your body generated real-time feedback in the form of sounds you didn't know your spine could make. There was no +7 copper sword here, no strength buff. Just you, the block, the sun, and an overseer who marked completion on a clay tablet with the enthusiasm of a man who had never personally touched a limestone block in his life. You didn't complain. Complaining was not a recognized part of the labor process. The other workers, conscripted farmers, same as you, moved with a focused, efficient misery that you found oddly comforting. Everyone was suffering at the same speed. There was a solidarity in it, the way there's solidarity in a group of people stuck on a delayed flight. Except instead of a delayed flight, it was a 40-meter ramp in 38-degree heat, and instead of landing eventually, you just did it again tomorrow. You received bread and beer for the work. You received exactly enough bread and beer to be able to do the work again the following day, which is either efficient resource allocation or a very elegant trap depending on your perspective. Back in the fields now, planting done, the wait begins. The weeks between sowing and harvest where the crops do their thing, and you do maintenance work, irrigation management, and the agricultural equivalent of anxious hovering. The irrigation channels need clearing. The shadoof, a counterweighted water lifting device that is genuinely ingenious and genuinely exhausting to operate for 4 hours straight, Needs working. Ka shows you how to operate it properly on the second day, after watching you do it wrong for most of the first. He demonstrates with the calm efficiency of someone who has operated a shadaf approximately 10,000 times and does not understand why you keep fighting the counterweight instead of using it. You're getting stronger. This is the game lying to you. Your stats are going up, stamina certainly, and something in the arms and back that wasn't there before. But the difficulty curve is scaling faster than your character is. The sun is a constant. The dust is a constant. The coughing from the next household over is a constant. You've started noticing that one of the children in Ka's family has had a fever for 3 days, which Ka's wife is treating with a poultice of honey and some kind of herb you don't recognize. The honey is medically defensible, actually. Antimicrobial properties, real antiseptic value. You know this from your 21st century wrinkle brain. The herb is probably fine. You hope the herb is fine. The fever breaks on the 4th day. You exhale. This was a close call in a world where close calls are the unit of measurement. You've been here long enough now to understand that survival in ancient Egypt is not one big dramatic obstacle. It's 100 small ones running simultaneously, each with their own failure state. And your job is to clear enough of them on any given day that you make it to the next. You're clearing them, mostly. You haven't checked the Nile water you drank this morning for turbidity because there was no point. It came from the same stretch of river as always, downstream of the village's morning activity, upstream of nothing useful. It tasted like it always tastes, like the river, like Egypt, like something you're going to be fine about, probably. Probably. Something shifts in your gut around midday. You keep working. By the end of the 2nd day, the gut situation has a name, or at least a mechanism, a parasitic flatworm that crawled in through the skin of your foot while you were doing irrigation work barefoot in the channel, because your papyrus sandals finally gave out, and Ka said the water was fine. Ka was not lying. Ka just has a different definition of fine than you do. One calibrated by a lifetime of Nile water exposure and an immune system that has been doing CrossFit since birth. Yours has not. The flatworm, Schistosoma hematobium, if you want the scientific name, which your gut absolutely does not care about right now, has set up a small civilization inside you, and the welcome symptoms include fever, fatigue, and an aggressive gastrointestinal situation that makes every trip to the edge of the settlement a new and humbling experience. Congratulations, you've picked up your first collectible. This is, unfortunately, not a rare drop. Schistosomiasis was so common in ancient Egypt that researchers found evidence of it in mummified remains, meaning people were carrying this parasite in such numbers that it survived the embalming process, which is a sentence that should make you feel things. But the flatworm is just the opening act. Egypt's disease roster reads like a trading card collection assembled by someone with a very dark sense of humor, and you are about to discover how complete a set you're capable of building. Tuberculosis is the headliner. Endemic, airborne, and entirely happy to travel through the mud brick walls of closely packed village housing. The coughing from Ka's neighbor that you mentally filed under things to worry about later has been filed incorrectly. It should have been filed under things to worry about immediately and at length. TB spreads through respiratory droplets, which, in a village where everyone shares space, water, tools, and air, means the transmission network is basically everyone you've met. Symptoms develop slowly, which is its own special cruelty. You won't know you've been recruited into the tuberculosis experience until several weeks in, by which point it's thoroughly established. You try to remember to turn your face away when Ka's neighbor coughs. You succeed approximately 60% of the time. Malaria is the second card in the collection, and in some ways, it's the more honest villain. It doesn't hide. The Nile floodplain, with its seasonal standing water and dense reed beds, is one of the finest mosquito breeding environments in the ancient world. Every evening, around the hour when the air cools and you'd normally enjoy being outside, The mosquitoes arrive with the coordinated enthusiasm of something that has been waiting all day for this exact moment. You've started sleeping with a linen cloth over your face, which reduces airflow to approximately uncomfortable and reduces mosquito access to approximately less than before, but not enough. Malaria's signature, the cycling fevers, the chills, the bone-deep exhaustion, announces itself about 2 weeks after the infected bite. A substantial portion of the village has had it. Several have had it more than once. Ancient Egyptian medical practitioners have treatments for the fever, which mostly involve more honey, incantations, and a combination of herbs that occasionally work for reasons nobody here can explain, and you choose not to examine too closely. Those practitioners, by the way, deserve a brief moment of acknowledgement before you decline everything they offer. Egyptian physicians were genuinely sophisticated for their era. The Ebers Papyrus, a medical text from roughly this period, contains hundreds of diagnoses and treatments, many of which demonstrate real observational intelligence. They understood wound management, recognized that the heart circulated something important through the body, and had antiseptic applications that weren't entirely wrong. They also believed that many diseases were caused by worm-like spirits moving through the body, which is, and you have to appreciate the irony here, not entirely incorrect given your current flatworm situation, just wrong about the mechanism. When the local physician offers you a treatment for your gut symptoms involving a paste of mixed herbs, castor oil, and a prayer to Sekhmet, you accept the castor oil component with genuine gratitude and quietly set the rest aside. Sekhmet is the goddess of plague and healing simultaneously, which tells you a lot about how Egyptians understood the medical universe. Trachoma is the one you don't see coming, which is literally appropriate because trachoma affects your eyes. A bacterial infection of the eyelids, spread by flies, and there are flies, there are always flies. The flies of ancient Egypt are as reliable as the sun and considerably more personally invasive. Trachoma was so prevalent in this region and era that it shows up in virtually every adult skeletal and tissue sample researchers have examined. Symptoms start with irritation and discharge, progress to scarring of the inner eyelids, and in untreated cases lead to blindness over years. Treatment in ancient Egypt involves eye drops made from plant extracts, copper compounds, and optimism. You start swatting flies with a new personal intensity. Ka watches you wage this war against the insect population with what you're now recognizing as his default expression: patient, mildly amused, unsurprised. Ka himself, you've noticed, has a persistent dry cough that he's had since before you arrived. He doesn't mention it. You don't mention it. There is an unspoken agreement in ancient Egyptian village life that everyone is carrying something, and the polite social contract involves not inventorying each other's symptoms out loud. You respect this. You also now know that you are absolutely carrying at least one thing and possibly assembling a collection, and the only real question is whether your 21st century immune system's novelty advantage offsets your complete lack of acquired local immunity. The math is not obviously in your favor. Your flatworm fever breaks on the 5th day. You lose half a week of field work. Amenhotep, who is tired of your nonsense, docks your grain allocation proportionally with the expression of a man who has heard every possible explanation for missed work and found all of them unconvincing. You eat less bread that week. The bread still has sand in it. You are developing an emotional relationship with this bread that is somewhere between resentment and dependence, which is probably how most ancient Egyptians felt about most things. It's 3 weeks later when the real complication arrives, and it arrives the way everything in ancient Egypt arrives, from outside, without warning, and with the immediate implication that your personal problems are no longer the priority. A runner comes through the village at midday, moving fast, speaking to the headmen in rapid clipped sentences that you can't follow, but whose energy you read immediately as bad. Ka's face changes. The other farmers in earshot exchange looks. Someone uses a word you've heard before in a different context. Soldiers. The Sea Peoples have been raiding the northern delta for 2 seasons. You knew this in the abstract, the way you know about things that haven't reached you yet. Now they've reached someone close enough that the pharaoh's call for auxiliary labor and military support has cascaded down through the administrative chain and landed, with perfect comedic timing, on a village where you are currently the most physically capable person who doesn't have malaria, tuberculosis, or a child under 3. Amenhotep, who is tired of your nonsense, points at you. The runner with the clay tablet points at you. Ka says something that is definitely sorry about this in Egyptian and hands you a strip of dried tilapia for the road. You've been upgraded from farmer to auxiliary soldier, which sounds like a promotion right up until you receive your equipment. A wooden spear, a hide shield, and a pair of sandals that are already better than anything you owned as a farmer, which is either encouraging or a very targeted form of dark irony. You march north with 17 other conscripts from 3 neighboring villages, following a career military man named something you can't pronounce who has the bearing of someone who has seen actual combat and the patience of someone who has never trained conscripted farmers before and is already reconsidering his career choices. The Delta is nothing like the Nile Valley. Flat, marshy, full of reed beds that hide everything and reveal nothing, with a smell that combines river mud, salt air, and something burning in the middle distance. The sea peoples are somewhere ahead. The military man says things about formations and shield positioning. You understand approximately 40% of it. Your spear is heavier than it looked. The ground is soft underfoot in a way that makes running feel like a suggestion rather than a plan. The engagement, when it comes, is loud and fast, and nothing like the arc of narrative logic that the last few months have been building toward. You duck. Something goes past your ear. You swing your spear in a direction that seems correct and make contact with something that is not a person, which is lucky. The career military man is doing the actual work nearby with a composure that borders on boredom. It ends the way these things apparently end out here, abruptly, with the sea peoples retreating into the reed beds and everyone on your side breathing very fast and counting their limbs. You have all of your limbs. This is genuinely surprising. You stand in the delta mud with your bad spear and your good sandals and your stomach full of bread grit and flatworm antibodies and 3 months of accumulated misery and something that might, from a certain angle, look like competence. Then Ka appears beside you, because of course Ka was also conscripted, and says something in Egyptian that you've heard before. You still don't know what it means. But he's handing you a piece of dried tilapia, and you take it, and the Delta sun is doing its best. And your health bar, battered, yellow, flickering, is still up. Still up.